awesome.
Drop the mic.
Let it go.
We're back online, fair warning. But not only did you give us a great answer, but you nailed it in exactly 30 seconds. That was what I was.
You did kind of drop the mic at the end.
Yeah.
I felt like you did, please.
Okay, we have the experimental and we have, can I call you establishment? Is that fair? I mean, where are those intersecting? Are you taken seriously, do you think, in St. Louis in terms of
Oh my God,
what
talk about big questions.
Yeah.
I hope so. I mean, it's interesting that I think we're called experimental. I think there's a lot of perception about, speaking with Fringe and what Fringe is. We've had companies that are over 100 years old producing the Fringe Festival. We were having conversations earlier about some of the most respected arts professionals in the city who see an outlet and opportunity at the festival. So I think just because maybe there's something experimental or slightly radical about that, but it certainly doesn't mean that it's not esteemed or respected. And we've partnered with CAM, so we've partnered with a lot of institutions and things like that, and hopefully we're setting a foundation to become peers with them.
What else did we talk about that we should talk about more in-depthly and more thoroughly?
I think the crystal ball in the future.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's
So what is the future?
One thing that we actually touched on earlier that I think is really, really important is when there is institutional or individual backing for artists' endeavor. And so that means money.
Yeah.
The more money in a community that comes from a huge, wide variety of sources that goes into not just supporting artists, but in commissioning work and giving artists grants, in creating paid opportunities for artists, that's when your arts community really grows in a city. And I've certainly seen it just with the Regional Arts Commission grants in the last year. When you see that is synonymous with a healthier, bigger, more supported, more respected, more serious arts community. And so I think that is the thing that is really, really essential, is that people put their money where their mouth is. We care about art. Sure. It's not a frivolity. It's essential to us. You're an artist. You should make a living wage.
Mm-hmm. Michael, you came from New York. You're native, but you came back from New York. And,
right.
and I think a lot of you have come from...
I lived in New York for 5 years, and I'm a native of St. Louis.
So how does St. Louis stacking up? And maybe that's the wrong word. Stacking. Why?
I think its art scene is larger than the size of the city, and I do think we're known as a city with a really robust art life. We have a great music scene. We have a visual art scene, and in terms of contemporary art has really grown a lot in the last 15 years, like by leaps and bounds. And I think the theater. I moved back here a long time ago, 1985, and there were like 2 theaters in town, and now I think there are about 57, or I don't know what the number is, but there are many, many really thriving theater groups. So it is very robust this is a town with many fewer people than in New York City. So anytime you have a lot of people and brain power bumping up against each other, it's going to make for interesting, it's like atoms colliding, and it makes for interesting things happening. So I think given our size, we've got a lot going on, but there's certainly room for people to come in. And I think what Lisa said about funding makes all the difference in the world, and who, sort of similar to the art grants would make a huge difference in this community.
Mallory, I think was it you that said that you sometimes see the same crowd?
Yeah.
Which maybe is a St. Louis thing. I don't know. I've heard people say that about restaurants, but nonetheless, I don't buy that personally. Is there a way that this is another Twitter question, follow-up question from Twitter, is how do we get more people into those crowds? How do we open up the doors there?
I think public art is important in that sense, that it really can cultivate a larger sort of cultural relationship to art and appreciation of it that hopefully will, get people to make the decision to go and participate in art on their own, instead of just sort of maybe, walking from the parking lot to a venue and then they see a piece, or walking from the parking lot to a restaurant and they see something happening that is art. But then cultivating that as a way of participating in their city.
People get mad when Metro puts up art, though, right?
I think There is also this piece that's a much bigger.
Maybe it's a small minority. I don't know. Maybe they have. Maybe
Those
they-
are the voices that we
those
block
are-
out.
I mean, I think there is this much bigger thing, though, too, that is a lot of times because art is the unrecognizable, the previously unknown, something that is new. And I'm talking about all art forms, right? Something you haven't seen, you might not recognize, you might not necessarily think of it as art because you think of art in this very iconic way that someone showed you a statue or a. And so I do think that there is a point that we all have to take responsibility for culturally, which is reminding ourselves, both children and as adults, to stop being afraid of the things we don't recognize, to stop being resistant to things that we don't recognize, and that rather than closing oneself down in the face of the unrecognizable, that these can be really the most wonderful experiences of our lives, is these moments where we are confronted with something that is confusing or strange or unknown, and instead of saying, I don't know what that is, so I don't feel comfortable, I feel stupid, I feel unworthy, saying, I empower myself to have my own opinion about this. And that is something I feel that we really have to teach ourselves and the people around us, because those are the things that are going to make people more open to different and various art forms.
Well, I think too, this past January, the Pulitzer, we put together a program called Reset. And what we intentionally tried to do was look at art forms that people don't necessarily think about seeing in a museum. So we had a huge drag show, and just by putting that art form in the context of a big art institution was a statement to say, you know, like this is your place. You know, art doesn't have to be the statue on the wall. It is in our lives. It's out there. You're already part of this community. And so I think this accessibility and audience are always a struggle, right? Because art's accessible, but like it's not. You know, it is, but it's not. Like we have to, as bigger institutions, figure out ways to engage with these communities and find entry points so that hopefully they'll come back and they'll feel more open and responsive to having those beautiful experiences.
So many different audiences.
Right.
And
Right.
especially in
That's
this
right.
community. There's so many, you know. So
I think, something that you had mentioned, Casey, about comparing this city to other cities, and New York was referenced, and there, one thing in this city, and one of the things that I've seen in the last decade is that there is institutional support that there hadn't been, when I lived here many years ago. But I think that other form of support coming from a collector base. So in a place like New York City, there's a collector base that for an individual artist that can maintain a studio practice. And I think that it's partly the job of the institution. I think it's partly the job of the gallerists, of the dealers that say, these are significant things that this individual is doing, and let me introduce you to their work, and let me tell you that you should consider including it in your collection because of this and that, And so it's that sort of like willingness to invest that will allow the future to continue to go, and the momentum that we have now to just keep building.
I just want to mention, I do think that there's a big challenge in St. Louis with regionalism and a lack of central access points. So coming along with this big entrepreneurial push and spirit, there's a lot of very different opinions about how things can be done and should be done. And I think in some ways we're not doing that very well. There's not a lot of centralized access point to what's going on in the arts. If I'm just here on a Thursday night and I say I want to go see a play or I want to go to an art opening or whatever, if I'm not already in that world, it's virtually inaccessible to me at all. I'm in the world and I have a hard time figuring out what's going on. And that I think is a giant elephant in the room question mark that
spread out,
needs to be discussed. And the institutions, I think, work together better than the patrons do. We've had conversations with Chesterfield Arts, we've wanted to work with them, but I think there's a lot of perception that wouldn't happen, and I'm not sure where that comes from.